Emily Miller is with us on the program right now. Hey, Emily, how you doing?
Hey, Cam, how are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us on short notice. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course. I mean, this story is really it's actually been very difficult to report on and write because it's so horrific. As you read and as you mentioned, Sergeant Corrigan was just sitting at home one night 2 years ago, and he served in Iraq for a year. He volunteered. He was embedded with the Iraqi army, went out on daily patrols, had a really obviously traumatic experience trying to identify IEDs, and came back and was having nightmares and sleeplessness. To make a long story short, he called this one number at VA hospital, which was supposed to be a counseling hotline, ended up being a suicide hotline. And that person who answered the phone then called the D.C. police. And the D.C. police, instead of knocking on the door and saying, do you want to kill yourself? Are you okay? Escalated the situation to the point where there were at least 25 officers in full Kevlar and with rifles surrounding his house, floodlights in, megaphone saying, come out, you're going to be okay, don't hurt yourself. He didn't want to come out because he was fine and wasn't suicidal, just couldn't sleep. And they ended up, finally they said, it's too late for you, you can't stay, you have to come out. So he came out, and they immediately tied his hands behind his back and put him on his knees, and put him in a truck and demanded that he give them the key to the house because he had locked the door on the way out, and he refused. And to use some gutter language, the cops said, we're not going to take this constitutional BS. Give us the key. He said no. So they raided his house top to bottom without a warrant. Found 3 unregistered guns and 7 different types of ammo that he used when he went to the range and borrowed other people's guns. They put him in jail on these unregistered guns charges, lost him in the system. I mean, I don't know how you lose a person, but it's just this horrible story. He ended up getting assaulted in jail, had to be put in protective custody, spent 2 weeks in jail on these charges. This was all in 2010. It's taken him this long to get a hearing, and just on Monday, at the U.S. District Court for D.C., the prosecutors dropped all the charges because of the illegal search and seizure, because they went in. But he's had to get a lawyer. This case has traumatized him in a way that the PTSD he has to an extent from Iraq has made this so much worse. Imagine being woke up middle of the night and arrested and spent 2 weeks in jail.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hung over his head for 2 years. It's affected his life. Let me just also add, when he walked out of his house, he looked down and just saw red rifle dots all over his chest. And the reason he couldn't sleep was because he kept dreaming that he was in Iraq getting killed. So you can imagine what this has done to someone who spent a year looking for IEDs, seeing things get blown up, living on a rooftop so he wouldn't get killed, has these horrible dreams, and look at the city does to him. Does the worst thing you can do to an American citizen, invade their home, throw them in jail. And once he was in jail, they kept changing his name so nobody could find him. His friends and family couldn't find him because went in. His name is Matt Corrigan. They changed it to Corrigan with a different birth date, and by the time his wrist, it's the worst story, and it's going to be a 4-part series.
Was this incompetence, or
no.
We don't know yet?
It's not incompetence. I will say that definitively. You don't have a SWAT team. They closed off blocks around him, a SWAT team invading a man's house, even if he did commit suicide. And what happened was the worst part of all this, and I'll get to this in future stories, this is just part one, because of the unwarranted search and seizure, because, these guys, these D.C. cops were so jacked up and so ready to go in, because they've been sitting there all night planning their big raid, that they never got a warrant. They broke down his door and went through everything to find these unregistered guns because, God forbid in D.C. your guns aren't registered. And because of that, and they didn't want to get it thrown out, they then invented a whole story that he was an explosives expert in the Army, that they talked to his commanding officer and that they knew this, that they smelled natural gas. They made it all up, and the prosecutors, in the end, found out the cops had made this all up, and that's how the charges got dropped. So no, there's no accidents along the way in this thing. And Cam, we just talked this less than a week ago about the cops doing something very not quite as bad, not as bad as this,
Right.
but they took another active duty vet with, who was legally transporting his guns, and they threw him in jail overnight over it, and took him 2 years to get his charges gotten dropped and to get his guns back. I mean, this is a pattern that's going on, and these cops are using these ridiculous registration laws to target these active duty military. I mean,
yeah.
These are the two that I know about so far, and and it's so upsetting. Matt Corrigan is the nicest, most decent person. He volunteered to go to Iraq. His day job, he's a reservist. His day job, he works at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He's a statistician with a graduate degree. I mean, he's such a kind, decent person, and wanted to go to Iraq. He's a sergeant, and he's a drill sergeant, so, it's very rare that would be needed overseas, but he wanted that for his military career, so he volunteered. Was embedded, just he and 9 other guys, embedded with the Iraqi army to help train them in Fallujah right after the second battle. So, I mean, it's just, it's just horrific what's happened to him, and he is going to sue the city for compensation for what's happened by both his life and he's not ever going to be the same.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. And, Emily, again, I can't thank you enough for writing these stories, for covering these stories. You are absolutely making a difference in Washington, D.C. by highlighting how good people are harmed by these really bad laws. And as you said, this is going to be a 4-part series?
4 parts on what's happened and the cover-up, especially, of what happened with Matt Corrigan and 2 weeks in jail over this, misdemeanors that were eventually dropped. And, I think in the right after this, we learned about this case of Augustine Kim, whose guns were taken away from him. They wouldn't return them to the city. In this case, I was in court with him on Monday with Matt, and his lawyer is Richard Gardner, the same lawyer, and Richard asked the judge about his guns, and the judge, went through all these hoops of why he couldn't return the guns to him, which is none illegal, and it said he'll decide by the end of this week, which is tomorrow, whether he can have his guns back, and he's had no charges against him. All have been dismissed. So, it's really what they're doing with these gun laws is to innocent people is just horrific. And, it's just, I almost feel like you can do it to me.
Right.
But to do it to our military and our veterans, it's just there's just no excuses for it. And what's going to happen again in this case is what happened in the Augustine Kim case is Congress is going to have to involve, because this city cannot run itself and can't govern itself. And I have a very strong feeling that Congress is going to get involved with what they did to this man and raided his house and arrested him for unregistered guns when his job is to carry guns. And he just got back from Iraq holding guns. I mean, this is ridiculous.
It truly is. Emily, thank you for documenting the absurdity, and look forward to having you on again very soon.
Thank you. Thanks for covering it. Thank you.